Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to HuffPost Rise. My name's Shetty, I'm your host. Today I'm talking about something that's really interesting to me. It's actually in honor of what's known as National Day of Listening, right? Now, if you've never heard of it, don't worry, neither have I, right? We're probably not listening. But the National Day of Listening happened on Friday. It's always the day after Thanksgiving. And it's a really interesting day because what you're meant to do on that day, or what you're encouraged to do, is people are encouraged to set aside time to record stories of families, friends, and local communities, right? Absolutely brilliant. Imagine if you actually set aside some time. Now, I know maybe many of you spent time with family and friends this weekend for Thanksgiving, or maybe you just spent time this weekend. But imagine actually spending time, setting aside time to record stories of families and friends. Now, the incredible thing about listening is that research suggests that the average person hears between 20,000 and 30,000 words during the course of a 24-hour day. The average person hears 20,000 to 30,000 words over a 24-hour period. Now, if you've got a chatty friend, you're hearing way more than that. And if you're tuning into me every day, you're hearing way more than that. Even though I'm talking about the honor of the National Day of Listening, I'm talking a lot. So I'm going to try my best to ask you more questions. But think about that. Do you think you're hearing that many words? 20 to 1,000 words? Imagine making sense of all that. So today I want you to achieve three things in this session. The first thing I want you to achieve is I want you to understand the importance of listening. Not just hearing, not just being there, but actually listening. The second thing I want you to gain from this session is how to listen better. How can we all become better listeners so that overall we can become better communicators? And the third thing is, how can you capture stories from your friends, families, and communities that will revolutionize your life? So we actually spend, believe it or not, between 70 and 80% of our day engaged in some form of communication. About 55% of it is devoted to listening, right? We always say 2 ears, 1 mouth. We spend 55% of conversations listening, and we spend 70 to 80% of our day communicating. Now, a lot of that's changed with digital technology, so we're reading a lot more than we were before as well. People say reading's out the window, but that's not true at all. We're reading. Now, every Facebook video has to have subtitles because more people are likely to read than even listen. So listening as a skill, listening as an art form, we're actually not using it as much. And that's why when you're speaking to someone, even when you're watching me, you're still messaging someone else. Even while you're watching me right now, you're writing something down. Even while you're watching me right now, maybe you've even got the television on. We've got so used to doing loads of different things at the same time. We've got so used to not having to listen that when we have to listen, we're not as effective. It's incredible, right? It's absolutely phenomenal that we actually don't pay as much attention to listening because we're not really harnessing or nurturing it as a skill. So today we're going to talk about that and how it's important. Now, most people usually only remember 17 to 25% of the things we listen to, right? That's less than a quarter. 17 to 25%, less than a quarter to up to a quarter of the things we listen to, we remember. So when you're listening to me every day, actually, no, you guys are much better than that. But everyone else, they follow that rule. 70 to 25% of people, that's all you hear. And the incredible thing is when we're listening, or even when we're speaking, our words only do 7% of the communication. 93% is our body language, our energy, the presence we're bringing to the conversation. So we all agree that it's something we all need to focus on. Now, listening actually affects us much more than we think. This is some interesting research I want to share with you. How many of you have a friend that nags and complains a lot? Check this out. Listening to nagging or complaining for 30 minutes or more can cause damage to the part of your brain that handles problem-solving skills. Did you hear that? Right? If you're going to only listen to 17 to 25% of what I say today, I want you to listen to this. Listening to a nagging or complaining friend for 30 minutes actually causes damage to the part of your brain that handles problem-solving skills. So I'm not telling you to not listen to your friend's problems. I'm not telling you to not listen to their challenges. It's listening to someone who's complaining or nagging, very different. This is one thing we can reflect in ourselves and also advise others that we're close to, that love us, is that we can share our problems, we can share our challenges without nagging and complaining, but actually stating facts. And if we can get into that process, if we can get into that habit, We won't be damaging someone else's problem-solving skills, which means they're more likely to be able to help us. And imagine when you're talking, you're also listening to your own nagging. So you're also destroying your own problem-solving skills. It's incredible. We are daily destroying our problem-solving skills, damaging them, because we're complaining about the problems that we can't solve, or that we want to solve or find the solutions to. So really think about that today, right? Really focus in on that. If you've got a friend who nags or complains a lot, explain this to them. Actually share to them that we can all share, we won't be able to solve it. And listen, this is not me saying don't listen to your friend's problems. It's changing the way we communicate about challenges and problems, talking about them in a positive way, talking about them with facts, talking about them seeking help as opposed to talking about them to nag and complain. Rainey, I listen to a lot of friends, but they don't listen back and they interrupt a lot. Okay, so lots of advice coming there, Rainey. Let's switch the focus back onto ourselves. Whenever we've got someone else causing us disruption, let's see what we can do about it. So Rainey, ask yourself these questions. Are you telling the story well? Are you getting to the point quickly? Are you making it interesting? Are you speaking about the right things to the right people? These are great questions to ask yourself when you're actually telling someone a story, explaining something to them. Sometimes it's like when I talk to my mum, right? My mum finds it more interesting to know what I've eaten throughout the day than she does to know that I've interviewed a really cool person on my show, right? Or that I'm speaking to someone really interesting about a work engagement. My mum's more interested in knowing about what I had for dinner last night, right? So it's like if I'm sharing with her something else, she's not going to listen. She may interrupt. She may talk about something else. That's how it works. Think about that. Think about what you can change first before realizing why are people interrupting you. Now, second of all, you may actually be getting that all right, but people are still interrupting you and they're not listening. Notice that this is something they're struggling with, and maybe you've got to give them some time listening to help them heal and grow as well. Rainey, thank you so much for that comment. It really helped. Francine, active listening is an art. Definitely looking for more tools in my belt. Francine, great. I'm going to dive into them. Let me dive into them now. The number one skill for active listening is don't multitask. First of all, with actual physical things. Don't multitask with your phone. Watch yourself twiddling your thumbs. Watch yourself like picking your nails, whatever it is. Don't multitask with physical things. Don't be looking at your phone. Don't have another book out. Try not to make notes, etc. That's a great way to start active listening. On a more subtle realm, don't be multitasking with thoughts and chores. If you want to be an active listener, you've got to cut out, you've got to focus in, zone in on that moment to give people that attention. And there's a great acronym by Julian Treasure called RUSSA from his TED Talk, where he talks about these are the 4 ways of being an active listener. The first thing is receive with attention, giving your attention, giving your presence, not multitasking. The second is A, appreciating what the other person's saying, actually appreciating it, actually saying it to them and saying, yeah, that's really interesting, right? That's awesome. The third thing is S, summarizing, actually listening to them for a period of time and saying, let me just see if I've understood that, and summarizing what you've just heard. And the fourth thing is asking follow-up questions. Challenge yourself to ask questions to further your conversation about what's being shared. So the 4 tips are, first of all, RUSSA, this acronym, R-A-S-A, R, receive with attention. Don't multitask, switch off your phone, move away. I know when I'm speaking to someone that's an important conversation, I put my phone away. I don't even leave it on the desk, right? Just put it away, get rid of it. Second thing is be there with that person from the moment they come in. Don't worry about your challenges, don't bring them up. Start talking about what you decided to speak about. Second thing is appreciate them. Okay, that's interesting. That's super interesting, right? Like what you guys do when you comment, you press the like and love button. It lets me know that you're appreciating, that you're listening, that you're tuned in. Actually give vocal, verbal, and physical and eye cues to know that you're listening, right? That will train you to be an active listener. Third one is summarize. This one is so important. Summarize what you're listening. And the fourth one is start asking questions, right? Start asking questions that are following on from what they're talking about. Cindy, how can you listen well when you think what the other person talking about is boring? Cindy, that's hard, right? And I'm not giving you tips on how to sit through boring conversations. I'm giving you tips on how to sit through conversations with people you love. If someone's boring, is their content boring? Is what they're sharing boring? Think about if you care for them. If you care for them, you'll be able to tune in and listen. You can depend on your care for an individual. You can depend on your love for an individual to get you through listening to something. The other way is actually changing up the conversation and offering an alternative. It's easy to say someone's talking about something boring, but it's really hard to actually offer an alternative and say, actually, let's talk about this. So those are two methods that can always work. Michelle says, I love to observe others during conversations. Most people are planning their answer story rather than listening. I can see it in their eyes. Isn't that so true? Shruti, can you explain the exact difference between nagging and listing problems? Nagging is where you're going into the details around other people involved in the situation rather than your experience of it. Nagging and complaining is amplifying and giving more airtime to how other people, what they're doing wrong, other people's mistakes, blaming, shifting the responsibility, justifying, than it is about your experience, right? Listing problems saying, I'm experiencing a challenge right now. I'm feeling insecure. I'm feeling like I'm not getting along with people at work. Nagging is that person at work's really mean to me. That person at work doesn't know how to talk to me. That person at work is annoying me. They're frustrating me, etc. You're shifting that. That's the difference. I hope that answers your question, Shruti. Travis, how do you approach someone who isn't listening to you because they are on their phone? Travis, I just set really clear rules. I noticed that when I put my phone away, people start mirroring what you do. I also have said to people that when I'm with them, I just say, let's all put our phones away. I think it's absolutely okay in this day and age to actually ask for that because we're never separated from our phones. So to actually be somewhere and ask for that, I think people will also value that. They'll actually feel that you care about that interaction as well. Alex, how do you not let yourself get distracted by your own thoughts? That's a tough one, especially when you're talking to someone in a challenging way. The acronym is the best way. Focus on giving even when listening. See, listening doesn't mean that you're just sitting back and letting someone offload. You're actually tuning into them and giving back to the conversation, not by giving your own opinion, but listening, appreciating, right? Actually taking part in that conversation. You won't get distracted by your thoughts. Now, I wanted to dive into what National Listening Day is all about. Today's not the National Day of Listening. It's in honor of that, which was last Friday. But I really like this concept, and that's why I wanted to share it with you. So the National Day of Listening is about you, all of you, getting the opportunity to become the interviewer. So you've watched my shows where I'm interviewing guests and experts about what they think and their new books and their ideas. Today, you get to be the interviewer. This week, you are the interviewer. Now, being an interviewer is also a great way of being great at conversation and being a great listener. If you know how to interview, sometimes when I'm in a conversation, I use a lot of the skills I use while I'm interviewing to use them in my conversation because that makes my conversations a lot more exciting, a lot more stimulating. Right? When you're tuning in, press the like or love button if you like tuning into the interviews I do, the Follow the Reader series, right? If you've seen some of those before with the authors, right? It's really important. If you can become a good interviewer, you'll become great at conversation. You'll become a great listener because you start asking questions that make what the other person say interesting, even when they may be struggling to make it interesting, right? So in the National Day of Listening, the pledge or the proposal is that you interview and create stories around loved ones, families, communities, and allowing yourself to dive into their messages. Just imagine how much wisdom there is inside a 60, 70-year-old, 80-year-old. Imagine how many stories there are. Imagine how many experiences there are. I've got this great friend in London. He's 60 years old. He's without doubt the best storyteller I've ever met. He's got a really interesting life, but the way he tells stories is phenomenal. The amazing thing is, whenever I'm with him, I learn something about a new culture. I learn something about an old generation. I learn something about a time that I never lived in. And it's incredible how much this National Day of Listening is focused in on this. How can we learn from other people's stories? How many of us have conversations every day that are just not meaningful, right? How many of you have a conversation that goes something like this every day? Hey, how's it going? Yeah, I'm doing okay. What have you been up to? Oh, nothing much, same old. Oh, cool, what are you doing this weekend? Oh, I'm about to do this. Oh, great, I hope you have a good weekend. Now, that's okay if you have that conversation with people you don't really connect with. But how many of those conversations happen with our family, with our friends, with our colleagues, with the people that we spend a lot of time with? Imagine you could revolutionize those conversations. And notice, all it takes is one conversation with depth to mean that the next time you speak to that person, you'll be having a phenomenal, engaging interaction. Have you ever had that before? You spend a weekend with someone and you feel like you're their best friend. Why? Because you live together. Because you spoke about things that you wouldn't speak about at a networking event or an awkward dinner with someone. How many times have you spent a day with someone and felt like you just connected to them? You can fast forward or accelerate that process by asking interesting questions. So these are some great questions that you can ask. Asking people their happiest moment brings energy into people's life. It can start by making them look slightly confused because they may not be thinking about it as much, But when they share it, they'll feel energy. It naturally drives energy into a conversation. Asking people about the wisdom that changed their life will share so much wisdom with you, like asking them for that. Asking people about the people that changed their life. Getting people to reflect on these things not only makes them more grateful, makes them more happy, but it allows you to also tune in to all of that. Another thing you can ask them is who has been the kindest to them in their life and who have they been the kindest to? Again, all of these questions are bringing out positive emotions, which people don't get to talk about. How often do you talk about these things? Ask people around you these questions. Today, I'm going to give you a whole list of questions. There's a whole load more in that link that we've pinned to the top in the comment section. I want you, by the end of this session, to tell me the 3 questions you're going to ask people close to you today. And you can even ask on social media. I would like you to actually have them face to face with people. If you can't do that, I want you to put these up on social media today. Email or on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, etc. Tag us in at HuffPost Rise as well. Follow us if you don't already on Twitter and Insta. And you can ask these questions. Choose your top 3 questions that you can ask, that you want to ask people, from the ones that I list or the ones that you find. And just be blown away by the answers people give. Another great question is people's earliest memory. Another great question for friends and colleagues is the first memory they have of you, right? Also asking people, was there a time that they didn't like you? Notice you have to ask people who actually like you now, right? Don't ask people who never liked you and don't like you now. Ask people that actually like you if they remember a time when they didn't like you. Great question for grandparents. And this is something I've always struggled with, really connecting with your grandparents, really having a conversation, something that I've always struggled with. And I've recognized I've always asked them the wrong questions. I've always asked them how's their health or how do they feel? And that's not a great question to start off on because they always start telling me about the challenges they're having, and that doesn't give wisdom or help them feel positive either. But you can ask them questions. Where did they grow up? What experiences did they have while they were growing up that were different from the ones we have now, right? Any stories that they were told when they grew up that they found were really interesting and unique? What did they do in their spare time that's different from what we did, right? These are all questions from the great list of questions from the National Day of Listening that are recommended. Now, questions for your parents, right? You can ask them, and this one's always a really interesting story. How did they pick your name, right? Maybe you already know that story, but it's an interesting name. It gets them thinking about when you were young again, helps them connect with that. Ask them what their nickname was in school, right? Ask them how their experience at school was, right? Asking them about what's gone the way they thought it would and what hasn't. Learning from their wisdom as well. See, these questions allow you to tap into a lot more than you would ordinarily. Jasmine, I always focus on listening. Listening has a greater effect in communication than speaking in many cases, right? So learn to have a conversation like an interviewer, right? It will stop you from getting bored. It will stop you from being offensive. Think about yourself as an interviewer. Even if that excites you, think about it. Pretend you're interviewing someone today. Pretend that you're interviewing your family member. If loads of people were watching, and if you want to make it really interesting, stream it on Facebook Live today. Right, stream the conversation if you're really excited, if you really want to go for it. But just imagine that someone was watching, record it, and actually record that. You can even post it. The National Day of Listening has a wall of stories that you can post it to that I recommend tuning into. Goldie, wish I did this more with my late mum, now need to do it with my dad. Exactly, we need to capture these stories now because we don't know how long we're going to be with these people. Right? Beautiful. And that's one of the things, one of the reasons why we do this is because there's so much insight, so much wisdom, so much experience shared. Now, all of us, our experiences are all online, on Instagram, on Snapchat, right? On stories online. Everyone else's stories are in here. We've got to unravel them. We've got to get them out. We've got to discover those stories, right? They didn't have Snapchat stories back in the day. They didn't have Instagram stories. So we've got to find ways of finding out people's stories so we can learn from them, so that we can also give them a good experience as well. I've got a few tips for you on how to become a better listener. The top one was don't multitask. The second one is don't expect the other person to not respond. If you don't want the person you're listening to not respond or interrupt, write a blog, right? Just get your thoughts out there. It's beautiful when people respond. You understand what they're thinking about. See everything as learning, right? Number 3, and check with people. Ask people, are you with me? Does that make sense? Do you understand that? Why don't you explain to me what I just said, right? In a non-confrontational way. Third thing is ask open questions, right? No complicated questions. The worst thing is when you ask a question, but it doesn't really ask anything, but you just said something and you just basically said a statement. Have you got friends like that? Friends like that who just ask stuff without actually making a point, but then they think they've asked a question. Someone may do that in your class as well, right? I've seen that all the time. Don't ask complicated questions. Don't actually make statements in your questions. Ask questions. Fourth is go with the flow. Really try and listen in, find connection points, find similarities. And the fifth one is don't compare or equate experiences. There's something in our brain that as soon as you hear someone say something, the first thing your brain does is, when have I had a similar interaction? When did I have something similar happen to me? When did that happen to me as well? When is that going to happen to me? And we say it. If someone says, oh, I just visited the theater this weekend, the first thing you say is, oh yeah, I just went to the theater 2 weeks ago. Right? It's very normal to start equating and comparing our experiences. Somebody once asked Stephen Hawking what his IQ was. He said he had no idea because people who talk about their IQs are losers, right? That was Stephen Hawking. He said people who talk about their IQs are losers. Is that comparing and equating people's experiences? We don't need to do that, right? Think about that closely. So today, in honor of the National Day of Listening that took place on Friday, I have some recommendations for you. I want you to understand the importance of listening to become an active listener. To become an active listener, start receiving with attention, switch off, don't multitask, put away your thoughts, appreciate what the other person's saying, remark verbally, visual cues. S, summarize what they're saying, and A, ask follow-up questions. The other thing I want you to take away today is that remember that listening to nagging or complaining, this is not listening to problems, listening to nagging or complaining can damage the part of your brain that handles problem-solving skills. Not only are you not helping the person, you're not able to help yourself or them in the future. Look at this great list of questions. Ask people, interview someone today, ask it on social media, go out there, find and record these incredible stories. And finally, learn how to become an interviewer. Have a conversation, become an interviewer in the way you ask questions. You will have phenomenal conversations. I can't wait for you to tune in with me tomorrow. Definitely find someone that you can interview today, that you can record their story, practice these skills, do it with each other. Maybe some of you have connected in the conversation. Thank you for joining in with the conversation. See you soon.